Nathan Carter wasn't just stepping into a prison. He was stepping into a war zone. Ironwood Correctional Facility had a reputation for brutality, corruption, and abuse of power, a place where guards ruled unchecked and inmates had no voice. But Nathan wasn't here to observe from behind a desk. He was going undercover as an inmate. No one knew who he was, not the prisoners, not the guards, and certainly not Officer Hank Rawlings, the man who was about to make a grave mistake. Nathan Carter took a deep breath as the heavy iron gates of Ironwood Correctional Facility groaned open. Dressed in a faded jumpsuit, worn-out sneakers, and a set of shackles around his wrists, he shuffled forward like any other newly processed inmate. The North Carolina heat pressed down on him, beads of sweat forming at his temples as he stepped onto the cracked pavement of the prison yard. He wasn't here as a criminal. He was here to observe. Nathan Carter was the newly appointed Warden of Ironwood, a facility notorious for corruption, unchecked brutality, and racial discrimination. But he hadn't come to tour the prison as an executive in a suit. Instead, he chose to enter as an inmate, unnoticed, unseen, and unrecognized, to witness firsthand how the men in charge truly operated. No press announcements, no welcoming committee, just Nathan and the truth waiting to be uncovered. The processing officer barely looked at him, barking out orders like he was just another number. The guards moved like they owned the place, their boots echoing against the concrete. Nathan caught the smirks, the whispers, the knowing glances exchanged between the staff, all dripping with the same underlying message. Inmates weren't people here, just bodies to be controlled. He scanned the yard, groups of men huddled in corners, divided by race and old alliances. A few prisoners shot him wary glances, sizing him up, deciding if he was worth the trouble. Nathan kept his head down, blending in, but his mind was racing. The real test was about to begin. He had to see the prison's true nature before anyone saw through him. Nathan Carter kept his head down, his hands still bound in cuffs, as he followed the line of inmates through the dimly lit corridors of Ironwood Correctional Facility. The place smelled of sweat, metal, and cheap disinfectant, a mix that clung to the air like something rotten beneath the surface. The walls, lined with barred windows streaked with years of grime, stood as silent witnesses to everything that happened inside. He could feel the eyes on him, guards watching, inmates watching. Everyone in Ironwood sized you up the moment you walked in. It wasn't just about survival. It was about establishing control. A few steps ahead, the line slowed as the guard at the checkpoint processed each inmate, directing them toward their assigned cell blocks. Nathan had barely taken in the details when a sharp, taunting voice cut through the air. "Hey, fresh meat. You look lost." Nathan's pulse steadied, but he kept his expression neutral. He turned slightly, just enough to see the man approaching. Officer Hank Rawlings, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, and radiating the kind of arrogance that only comes from years of unchecked power. His uniform looked crisper than the others. His baton rested easy on his hip, and the smirk curling his lip told Nathan everything he needed to know. This was the man who ran the prison, not by title, but by fear. Nathan didn't answer. He kept his shoulders relaxed, giving nothing away. Rawlings chuckled, slow and condescending. "Not much of a talker, huh?" He took a step closer, invading Nathan's space, his breath thick with coffee and cheap tobacco. Nathan could feel the tension shift. Other guards stopped to watch. Inmates near the walls exchanged glances. Some, the ones who had been here long enough, already knew what was coming. "You ain't gotta talk," Rawlings continued, mocking the silence. "You'll figure out real quick how things work in here. Some of y'all are slow learners, though." He reached forward, snatching Nathan's inmate ID from his chest, looking it over as if it mattered. "Carter. Let me guess, you're one of those smart ones. Think you're gonna breeze through your time, stay out of trouble." He leaned in, his tone low but dripping with authority. "You belong to me now. You all do. And you're gonna learn to say, 'Yes, sir,' real fast." Nathan stayed still, unblinking, letting the moment stretch. He had known the first test would come soon. He just hadn't expected it to be this easy. Nathan held his ground, keeping his expression blank as Rawlings sized him up, his smug grin widening. The air in the corridor had shifted, thick with anticipation, silent except for the distant clanking of cell doors and the low murmur of onlookers. Rawlings took a step closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor, radiating the kind of authority that came with years of unchecked power. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Nathan to flinch, to stammer, to show fear. But Nathan had seen men like him before, bullies in uniform, drunk on control. "What's wrong, Carter? Cat got your tongue?" Rawlings taunted, his voice mocking, almost playful, like this was all a game to him. Nathan said nothing. Rawlings chuckled, shaking his head. "I know your type. You come in here thinking you're different, that if you keep your head down you'll be left alone. That's not how this works." Then in one sudden motion, Rawlings slammed Nathan against the cold concrete wall, pressing his forearm against his throat, just enough to make breathing difficult. Not enough to be outright brutal, but enough to make a point. A few officers laughed. One of them muttered, "That one ain't gonna last long." Nathan kept his body relaxed, refusing to struggle. He met Rawlings' eyes, steady, unmoving. Rawlings leaned in, his voice a low growl. "You don't get to play tough in here. You answer when I talk to you. Understand?" Nathan finally spoke, his tone flat. "Yes, sir." It was the response Rawlings wanted, but not the way he wanted it. The grin flickered on Rawlings' face, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Rawlings let him go, stepping back like he had won something. Nathan exhaled slowly, his chest rising, falling. The game had begun. Nathan barely had time to adjust before Rawlings chuckled, shaking his head. "Still standing tall, huh?" His voice was laced with amusement, but there was something sharper beneath it, frustration. Without warning, Rawlings flicked his fingers toward Nathan's chest, shoving him back just slightly. It wasn't about force, it was about control. The other guards snickered, exchanging knowing glances. "You'll learn. They all do." Rawlings smirked before turning away, his boots echoing against the concrete. Nathan exhaled slowly. Lesson learned. Ironwood thrived on humiliation, but Rawlings had no idea who he had just tested. Nathan remained still, watching as Rawlings turned his back, basking in the moment. The senior officer had done this countless times before, reinforcing the hierarchy of control in Ironwood. But something about Nathan's silence didn't sit right with him. Rawlings paused, glanced over his shoulder, and smirked. "You're tougher than you look, Carter, but don't get comfortable. I promise, this place has a way of breaking everybody." Nathan gave no reaction, and that was exactly what pushed Rawlings further. The officer slowly turned back, stepping closer than before, his eyes narrowing. The other guards, now watching intently, grinned in anticipation. Then, without warning, Rawlings flicked his fingers toward Nathan's forehead, a calculated condescending move meant to humiliate. A few guards chuckled under their breath, while one of them muttered, "Man, this one's got fight in him. Rawlings is gonna love that." Nathan exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance just slightly. He could feel the weight of every inmate and guard watching, waiting to see how he would respond. But he already knew what he had to do: stay in control. Rawlings tilted his head, amused. "That's it? Thought you'd be more fun." He turned away, satisfied with his own display of authority. The guards laughed, shaking their heads. Nathan kept his face neutral, but inside, his mission was now clearer than ever. This wasn't just about corruption, it was about a system built on degradation and unchecked power. Rawlings thought this moment proved his dominance. He had no idea it was the beginning of his downfall. Nathan kept his expression neutral, his breathing steady. Rawlings may have thought this was just another routine display of dominance, but he had no idea who he had just humiliated. Before the moment could linger, the prison's overhead intercom crackled to life. "All staff report to the main briefing room immediately." Rawlings barely reacted, his smirk never wavering. "Guess the boss wants a meeting. Lucky for you, Carter. We'll pick this up later." Nathan kept his eyes forward, saying nothing as Rawlings turned and motioned for the other guards to follow. He let out a slow breath, taking in the weight of what had just happened. Now it was time. Inside the main briefing room, officers filed in, some leaning against the walls, others casually chatting. Rawlings stood toward the front, arms crossed, looking as confident as ever. Captain Roger Tate, a seasoned officer, called for order. "All right, listen up. The new warden is here, and he's got something to say." The room stilled. Then, as Nathan stepped forward, the tension shifted completely. Rawlings' smirk faltered. Recognition hit like a punch to the gut. Nathan walked to the front of the briefing room, his steps measured, controlled. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him. Some officers straightened their postures, Others exchanged uneasy glances. Rawlings, however, remained still, arms crossed, his usual smirk frozen in place, but Nathan could see it now, the first sign of doubt. Nathan set a file on the podium, his voice steady. "My name is Nathan Carter. As of today, I am your new warden." The room went silent. Rawlings blinked, stiffened, but said nothing. Nathan continued. "I arrived this morning under different circumstances, because I needed to see this place for what it really is, and what I witnessed was worse than I expected." A few officers shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances at Rawlings. Nathan let the silence linger. "I saw abuse. I saw officers mistreating inmates without fear of consequence. That ends today." He looked directly at Rawlings. "Ironwood isn't your kingdom anymore." Rawlings' jaw clenched. For the first time, he was no longer in control. A heavy silence hung over the briefing room. Every officer felt the shift in power, but no one dared to speak. Rawlings stood rigid, his confidence cracking. Nathan held his gaze, unflinching. "Effective immediately. Officer Rawlings is suspended pending an internal investigation." Gasps rippled through the room. A few officers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Others swallowed hard. No one had ever dared to challenge Rawlings like this. Rawlings' face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You can't be serious. You don't know how things work here." Nathan's expression remained firm. "No, Rawlings. I know exactly how things work here. That's why it's changing." Rawlings let out a dry chuckle, but it lacked the confidence from before. "You're making a mistake, Carter." Nathan took a step forward. "No, the mistake was letting you run this place unchecked." The room remained dead still. "Pack your things. You're done here." For the first time, Rawlings had nothing to say, and that silence was the loudest moment of all. Idea 9. Officers begin to feel the change. 120 words vertical bar YouTube community guidelines compliant. Rawlings stormed out of the briefing room, his boots pounding against the tile floor, but no one followed him. For the first time in years, the officers weren't looking to him for leadership. They were looking at Nathan. Nathan scanned the room, taking in the mix of shock, unease, and quiet realization. Some officers stood stiff, unreadable, while others exchanged cautious glances. "This isn't about punishment. It's about accountability," Nathan said, his voice even. "And this is only the beginning." A few officers nodded slightly, as if processing what just happened. Nathan knew not everyone would embrace change right away. But the most important shift had already begun. Rawlings no longer controlled Ironwood. Rawlings wasn't set the type to walk away quietly. Days after his suspension, he filed an appeal, claiming unfair treatment. Nathan expected it. Men like Rawlings never believed they could lose. The investigation moved quickly. A deep dive into his record uncovered years of misconduct, excessive force, falsified reports, intimidation tactics. Complaints that had been ignored were now at the center of the case against him. His appeal was denied without hesitation. When the news broke, some officers acted indifferent, while others seemed relieved. Nathan had made one thing clear. Ironwood would no longer protect those who abused power. Rawlings had built his reign on fear. But in the end, it wasn't fear that won. It was justice. Nathan knew removing Rawlings was only the first step. Real change meant rebuilding trust, not just with the officers, but with the inmates too. One afternoon, while walking through the yard, Nathan felt a pair of eyes on him. Tyrell Johnson, a longtime inmate, stood watching. "Never thought I'd see someone like Rawlings taken down," Tyrell said, arms crossed. "They always protect their own." Nathan met his gaze. "Not anymore." Tyrell studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was the first crack in the wall of distrust. Nathan didn't expect overnight change. But moments like this proved it was possible. Ironwood was no longer untouchable. A year had passed, and Ironwood was no longer the same prison. The culture of fear and unchecked power had cracked, making way for something new. Nathan walked the halls, observing officers who had once followed Rawlings now carrying themselves differently. Those who resisted change were gone, replaced by officers who understood the meaning of leadership and accountability. Inmates, once conditioned to expect abuse and neglect, had begun to speak up, knowing their voices mattered. Nathan paused at the yard entrance. Tyrell Johnson met his gaze, giving him a silent nod of respect. Change wasn't easy. It never was, but as Nathan looked around, he knew one thing for certain. This fight had been worth it. Nathan Carter's journey at Ironwood Correctional Facility mirrors the real-world fight for accountability, justice, and ethical leadership. Whether in law enforcement, corporate settings, or everyday life, power unchecked breeds corruption. Leaders must be willing to step into the reality of those they serve, just as Nathan did, to truly understand systemic issues. For those facing injustice, speak up. Silence enables toxic environments to thrive. For those in leadership, lead with integrity. Holding people accountable, even when uncomfortable, is how real change happens. And for everyone, respect is not optional. The way we treat others, regardless of status, reflects our true character. Change isn't immediate, but like Nathan proved, consistency and courage can break even the most corrupt systems.